I'm very grateful to the organizers because it gives me the opportunity to learn a little bit about a very important subject on which I'm totally ignorant. The ignorance has some advantages sometimes, which is that I will be a very moderator because then therefore I will be strictly functional and trying to simply make a fair debate because they are all smiling and scholarly, well-behaved, but when they start the issues, not the personality, but the issues, the whole thing will heat it up, and my role will be to clamp it down. But we are going to start, we agreed, with your comments and questions from the participants at large, and then if you could please try, if it is a comment or a critical comment or a comment of any kind, don't disguise it as a question. Just say it. And if it is a question, be an honest question. And you please address your comment to a specific person or group of persons or to the world at large, but try to be specific, and then the colleague who will be called upon will respond, and then I trust all the others immediately will jump on him, and we'll start the discussion, and then we'll go into another round prompted by you and plurally commented in the panel. So who wants to start? We have about 1 hour and 25 minutes, so that's what we're here, strictly. 6:25, we finish.
Hello, then I'll start. My name is Eva Delera from WOC, and my comment, I guess, is that of the role of social entrepreneurs around the world, because that would actually tie to many of the projects here presented, and how we can empower them so to make projects sustainable, really, in the locations where we're working.
Any preference in the panel, Eva?
None, because all of them presented projects in developing
So who wants to comment on her comment?
First, a little clarification. Could you just clarify what you mean when you say social entrepreneur?
Right. These are local social entrepreneurs that sometimes we like. We were talking before. These are people, local people, in villages in South Africa, or in other locations in China, in India, and these are people that are identified as people who would lead initiatives, social initiatives. And instead of going there with your company, with your funds, with your project landing, and then maybe the funds are gone, and then you leave them without anything. From the beginning, you contact a local person who has the qualities of a leader, of a social entrepreneur, that and you work with them. So when you leave, when your funds are over, he or she is able to carry out that project successfully, or at least try to make it sustainable.
I think maybe Matt or John.
Yeah, I'm aware of the phrase, and in fact it was a phrase, when I mentioned Bill Gates talking in Doha, it was a phrase he conspicuously didn't use at all in speaking for 45 minutes about ICT and development, so that's possibly slightly worrying. I think there's a lot of work in how social entrepreneurs have become active in different developing countries of the world, in activities for which I think there are kind of local markets. I mean, not necessarily profitable markets, but local markets within their community. I think the conspicuous absence is actually those around learning and around education. There doesn't seem to be much activity where the social entrepreneurs are engaged in delivering learning. So, for example, I went to a living lab in South Africa, one of quite a few I went to, and they've got an HIV/AIDS clinic, and that had spun off a restaurant, a nappy factory, a bakery, a kind of pay-as-you-go dentistry, and they were all, if you like, social enterprises, but there wasn't an educational one. So there's clearly some way to go in that kind of understanding the mechanics and the economics and the values that would support social enterprises around learning. I don't know if there are different models that we should look at. I mean, the idea of free schools in the UK might almost be what you'd call social enterprises for education. You know, they were kind of volunteer run, and again, they had no aspirations to grow, or even much of an aspiration to be transferable. But maybe, having just thought of it, that's the nearest I've seen. But I think there is always a worry about how, if you look at a particular instance and you see it successful, what is it that you learn from it that you can then transfer? And I think most of the time we learn the wrong thing, we see the wrong thing, and we then try to generalise on that basis. If we find social enterprises around learning, there's a worry we'll kind of analyse them and find the wrong thing and think we can kind of knock them out of a cookie cutter. And I think that's problematic. Sorry. He tailed off at that point. Sorry.
Okay, so I just want to add to what John has said, and hopefully I'm not contradicting him, because I think part of that also... oh, I must... Okay. Okay, so I think part of the thing about my response is, well, what exactly is a social entrepreneur? Because, well, if you take a really broad definition of a social entrepreneur, it's somebody who's really doing something in a way that's entrepreneurial, so that you could actually do some social good as a, well, either as a direct benefit or as a side effect, and at the same time still making this activity so-called commercially viable to some extent. Well, you actually have such social entrepreneurs in education in developing countries. Okay, maybe that doesn't fit the definition that John has in mind. Okay, are you familiar with James Tooley's work? Okay, yeah, so this is where I got reminded about James Tooley. Okay, so James Tooley is a professor of education policy at the University of Newcastle. So one of the things that he's really well known about for his research is that he actually focuses on this area called various ways of actually providing educational services to the poor. So he recently just wrote and released a book that was really about affordable private school. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that just came out maybe 1 or 2 decades ago, and a lot of the traditional international development funders just couldn't believe that phenomenon when he wrote about it. And I actually went to track down some of those schools myself. So I'm not too sure about the extent to which that model is broadly applicable. But this whole idea about affordable private school is around this idea, and which I've seen for myself to some extent, that you could actually have people who operate private schools for the poor, and you would charge a monthly tuition fee for these kids between grades 1 and 12, for example. A monthly tuition fee might be something on the order of, say, 100 to 150 rupees per month at the minimum. So that works out to maybe slightly more than $3 a month. Yeah, and some of them actually deliver pretty good education. I mean, pretty good in the sense that when you compare that against the kind of private schools that I do my research in, it's a completely different story. So I can't really address any more of your question beyond that, because we are also in the process of actually trying to work with some of these schools ourselves to figure out what exactly makes for a good model of engagement between researchers like myself and them, and how do we do it in such a way that the kinds of say literacy learning games on cell phones could be sustainable with their involvement after we leave.
Oh, it's just occurred to me that barefoot doctors might be another analogy one could draw on, as well as free schools. But actually most schools in rural Kenya are to some extent social enterprises, because the state-funded teachers are supplemented by community-funded teachers. But all of our examples, or all of my examples, we haven't actually talked about the role of mobiles or technology or infrastructure. And I don't know if there's a way of rolling those into any of these kind of formulae as well.
Thank you. Comments? Questions? If you don't speak, they will.
Let me just share with you. When we were thinking about this debate, I was kind of looking into the many old notes and literature and so on, and I found that in the 1999, Tony Bates has published an article where he put such a kind of thought, which today I think to have it in 1999, it was kind of a very sensitive and visionary, I would say, attitude. And he was saying that bringing such an intensive flow of education our way into the native communities who are very different, we are actually stepping into a very dangerous or something like this territory where we have to go very, very carefully, because we do not know the way how to know that we are doing that right and not doing harm to these people with the best intentions of us. So what do you think about this?
It occurs to me that something I've thought a lot about mobile learning is I'm very concerned when people talk about delivering content. I'm very concerned when people act as though mobile phones are just being used as a vessel for kind of squirting stuff at people, which is I don't actually think that is education. And I think relating to the point you were raising, if that's what people are doing, if they're squirting a lot of stuff at people, which may or may not be culturally appropriate, that seems daft to me. I quite like the term technology enhanced learning, because what I feel that we should be doing is giving people technology to enhance the teaching and learning that they're doing that's appropriate for them. And that may be in the developing world, or that may be in the school down the road or the university down the road. I think it should be about tools that support teaching and learning, not just some way of just delivering stuff which other people think you should have. And something I have a particular loathing for in the kind of work environment is this approach about everybody having to have compliance training for the latest kind of health and safety diktat, or that's and people talking about that as though it's education, as though it's training, but when it's just like squirting you will and you will not kind of information down the line.
Thank you. Emma, this is something that I struggle with as well. And I don't know what the answer is. I agree that we have to move, we have to be careful. But the difficulty is that people are subject to influences all the time. So coming from South Africa, after 1994, we became a democratic nation. And one of the visible differences was that culturally the doors opened. So before, now you could actually get Levi jeans, and you could get MTV, and you get all these things that, whether you want them or not, you're getting them. And in many ways, it's made South Africa a much richer place. And like I was saying the other night, we've got people from Africa, from north of South Africa, so there's real influence. But you couldn't stop that flow, right? So life kind of, the Western world just descended on South Africa. So if you take a village or a community that you say be fragile with, they're being subjected to this bigger kind of influence all the time. And if you go too slowly, you also can miss opportunities. And it's this, how slow, how careful is too careful? Because on my project, it was interesting listening to Matt's, because Matt's was very academically rigorous, amazing research, amazing depth of understanding. I didn't have time for that. I just took a handful of something, threw it against the wall, and to see what would stick. So it's kind of, is there a middle ground? And how? I don't know.
Mireia?
Yeah, I could like maybe to make a kind of comment of around the different presentations you made. Better? Yeah. Okay. And it's regarding, and it connects with your last comments regarding the point that mobile tools and in general all ICT should be supporting tools for whatever we do, for any kind of activities we develop. So in this sense, I would like, again, to go through this point that you introduced as well, Jill, regarding motivation of those who are supposed to use this kind of tools, being then mobile ones or not. So I think that around the 2-day sessions that we had is a point on motivation for uses. So we saw motivation, high engagement and motivation in the UK case. We saw it as well in the South African case, with a very nice point regarding the use and the transformation of language. And as well in the case of India that Matt presented this morning as the point of enrolling students in learning outside the school, in learning outside the formal environment. It's as well in the same line. So in this sense, my point here can be as well transformed into a question that maybe more than one of you could answer regarding the fact of the conflicts and tensions between formal education and this kind of learning, and this learning which is just delivered outside the school, outside the hierarchies, outside of the teacher's controls, at least. So maybe you have some comments regarding that.
Oh yeah, quite a few. A lot of the mobile learning research community spend a lot of time telling each other that mobile learning is raising motivation. And in some sense, I've got a gut belief that that's the case, that learners are motivated by these devices. But I think my problems are twofold. The first is actually what we're often seeing is mobile technology being provided by institutions, by funders, by universities in order to conduct a project or conduct a program. And so what in part we're seeing when motivation is raised is motivation being raised by spending money. That begs two questions. One is, would the motivation have been raised more if the money had been spent on something else? So actually, should we be asking whether motivation will be increased by better school toilets or better school libraries rather than mobile phone technology? Second, actually, there's 3 points. Secondly, I think, so I've done some work with a colleague, Agnieszka Korska-Huren from the Open University in the UK, looking at accounts of evaluation in mobile learning projects. And I worry that as evaluators, the mobile learning research community is incompetent and therefore don't trust what we say. Although when I've said that, actually, other people have just said, well, what's the difference? Everyone else is an incompetent evaluator as well. In e-learning, it's just the same thing. So when you say that it's raised motivation, I'm not sure that we are competent enough to get the evidence. Right? Yeah, Karen.
But maybe I should clarify my point. My point is that projects may be successful only if there is motivation and engagement. I mean, if you put these handsets on the room and just see what happens with them, is like computers here in public schools at primary level. It happens nothing because they are just put there, but there is no engagement, no motivation. There is not a project. So in this case, I think it's relevant that I make these nuance in the fact that not just putting this there will create motivation and then success, or what we can define as a success. That must be a very big discussion. But you need motivation that must be operated through other channels that are not strictly related to technology, but related with organizational change, with a lot of other social and local issues that must be taken into account.
I think as you describe more and more factors in motivation and in the context of your intervention, it then becomes more and more difficult to actually do an evaluation, especially if you mentioned informal education or informal learning. That's really impossible to evaluate because, you know, we're talking about something is mobile, but most of our methods for evaluation are static. So they're just kind of, they're not, the message is not the medium.
Thank you. You know, I think a lot of, thank you. I think a lot of what we're seeing, and certainly this was my point of departure for the M4Lit project, was to say, let's look at what's already happening, what already motivates people, and what's already in their hands. Because I was also part of the telecenter, you know, kind of movement, and obviously it's a very noble thing to do, I think, and I think it's very useful to put computers into schools and to community centers, and I've seen benefits, and obviously, you know, that's a whole thing unto itself, but we've spent 10, 20 years doing that without much impact, or without much kind of scale. Now cell phones come along. The mobile companies don't think about what's the impact going to be. They're like, okay, you know, the queue starts here, you start buying them, this is how much they are. So this thing's already in the hands of people. People already want to chat. They already want to connect with their friends. That's an inherent human motivation, to be social, to chat, and to kind of leverage that for our interventions. So that's, for me, that kind of helps thinking. I haven't kind of bombarded them with such a new thing because, rightly or wrongly, that thing's there already. So to kind of, but to use that inherent motivation. And, you know, in South Africa, and in most of Africa, my colleague, Steve Song, he's the telecommunications fellow, he's trying to come up with an index to work out how much it costs somebody to make a phone call in Africa, but like the McDonald's, you know, hamburger index, and they're doing quite well, and his kind of factor is a day's work. And in Rwanda, and it's like, how much of a day's work, your average worker, is a 3-minute phone call? You know, and in places like Rwanda, it's something like a full day's work. And you think, like, why would anybody ever make a phone call? Because it's a whole day's work. But the thing is, people inherently want to communicate, and they need to communicate. And that's the kind of, you know, piggyback on that low-hanging fruit, and that's, I think, where one can see successes.
Thank you. There was a hand raised somewhere here. Oh, it's Eva again, huh? Go ahead. The wall is those who take initiative.
Actually, I want to say that I loved everyone's projects and everyone's presentations, and I loved the comment made in regards to the how do you say, enhanced learning, technologically enhanced learning. But I really want to take my hat off actually to Steve's project, because we are talking about delivering learning, you know, or education through these mobile devices. And I like that project in the sense that it's actually more emotional, engaging motivation in what it means to empower people. You know, so we're talking to these villages that they have nothing, you know, and here we are delivering learning. I like this project in the sense that we are promoting, I know, Manuel, you weren't here, but it was amazing. You know, it's having locals actually publish and write. And we were talking about possibly writing poems as well. And that is using the technology to empower them and make them feel, and make them believe in the I can, which I think it's great for that later phase of studying, learning, and education. So in that sense, you know, I just wanted to take my hat off. Right, thank you.
I guess, well, I'm Cesar Corcoles with WOC, and this might not really be a question. It's just something that came to my mind when you were speaking about evaluation of things. And it's this philosophy of failing fast that a lot of entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley are thinking about. You've try something, you fall down, you try to get up on your feet again and try and iterate many, many times, and you're going to fall down maybe 10, 15 times. So maybe trying for short-term projects, which is something quite unacademic, if I may say, might actually be better for some purposes on the field. I don't know how you feel about that.
One of the things that crosses my mind is actually the extent to which projects can't fail, how so many projects are actually doomed to success. And you see that in all sorts of different ways. I mean, in my work in Kenya and actually in Wolverhampton, I see investigators who are very concerned about a negative evaluation, rocking the boat, killing off the initiative, killing off the idea. But I also see the fact that funders give us money to do research. Do they really give us money to fail? Probably not. You know, they're not going to be funders for much longer if they give money to failed projects. You know, and there are people's careers in projects. There are, you know, and there is a hierarchy of projects being funded, funders, funders, and there is an economy of the cycle of funding, you know, that we have to bid for money, do the project, publish the project, go for more funding. Again, can we go for more funding if the last project was a failure? Like I say, there's a lot that are, and there's kind of buy-in and momentum. It's very difficult to stop the train once it's started to move. So yeah, I'd like more projects to fail.
Interesting excursion to the degrowth paradigm.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I can talk a bit about my own experiences when you talk about failures too. I'm not sure if you remember one of the slides I presented this morning, you know, that timeline slide, and how in the first 1.5 years we tried a lot of ideas, almost all of them failed. Yeah, and that was actually very important for us because we got, so the problem with that kind of work is that, you know, you're doing that as a university researcher, but it doesn't count as scholarly research. So it means that you cannot actually publish a lot of that work. Although these days I do know how to frame it as some kind of findings that you could publish, at least in terms of design research and exploration of a design space. So that was what I was doing just a few weeks ago with one of my graduate students, because she embarked on the same path, is walking in my footsteps now. Yeah, but the challenge I think with doing this kind of work and you know, trying to look for explicit failures is that you're not going to be publishing for quite a while, which can be very frustrating. It can be a problem also in academia. Yeah, but I think one way to approach this in a way that I think is responsible, like what John was saying, because people's careers are also on the line. So I think it's important to do that in a way where you don't actually pick on a lot of other staff members and students, because you know, you're really just getting results and you don't have a good sense of how stable the situation would be moving forward and whether or not you can actually have some sustainable funding. So at that stage I was lucky that the only funding source we had was from the US government, National Science Foundation, so they didn't quite care whether this was a failure or not. Yeah, and I think part of the issue about doing this kind of work is that if you know how to present that in such a way that the failures are instructive. I mean, I know what I'm saying is a cliche, but yeah, if you do know how to present your failures in a way that's instructive, write a report that is balanced in terms of what worked and what didn't. Like, you know, when we first came across that battery that swollen battery problem, at first we were shocked, but later on, I mean, if you use the approach, the mindset of an ethnographer, so the way those guys think through things is that, well, all these kinds of things, you know, might look like seemingly mundane kind of things, but if you can actually read the social significance behind that, so that's one way to actually probe deeper into some of the results you see. Yeah, so with that, I think that's enough ranting from me.
Thank you. As a quick footnote to your most interesting discussion, you talk very well about the philosophy of Silicon Valley. Should be pointed, knowing quite well Silicon Valley, that people, this model about failure, what is interesting about it is that people bet their houses. Their first capital is the mortgage of their house. And if they lose their house. That's what I call failure. Now, visual psychology studies show that we pay attention to the upper right corner. And this is not because Eva is there. It's really a universal rule. So I'm going to ignore the right upper side. I'm going to the bottom left side. So, or the left side in general. Okay, you see?
from many years ago, education...
Could you please identify yourself? We will not tell the police.
Excuse me. Ana Virginia Quesada, Fundación Omar Dengo, Costa Rica. From many years ago, education is 1, 2, or much more a step behind learners. Why this situation is wondering us nowadays? And if we consider technologies are a wonderful learning tools, why we have a lot of problems identifying particularly learning achievement?
So problems identifying learning achievement you're asking about. Obviously a big subject, but I suppose from my own experience, quite a lot of my work is with people who are working with vocational learners. And in that context, the mobile technologies have been very useful because the multimedia functionality of them enables people to use things like video and audio in order to record the extent to which people are meeting the competencies of the job. So and I think in that context, mobile technologies are enhancing the process of assessing achievement rather more than some of the systems we've had before, where you were either trying to do things on a kind of paperwork basis or you're very reliant upon somebody going and physically observing and recording. So in that way, the mobile technologies are enabling you to do things rather more kind of cost effectively as well.
By the way, I certainly know you. I just wanted to have your identification for purposes of recording. Hello.
Thank you. You know, one of the reasons that my project hasn't gone into schools, like we chose to go outside of schools, just reach teenagers out there. That was a conscious decision I made because it's just schools it's going to take too long and it's too hard, and it's easier just to go outside and then come back. And the more I talk to young people and observe school classroom situations, the situation of a learner inside the classroom, like I was saying yesterday, is often disconnected, facing forward, unparticipatory, and then outside of school it's totally different. And when I talk about this in my slides, I have a picture of a shopping mall, the food court in a shopping mall, and there's just McDonald's, and there's all these lights, and that's the world outside that teenagers are being exposed to. Whereas inside the classroom it's very different, and it's only a matter of time before the school system something's going to give, because the outside world is changing so much compared to inside the classroom that the classroom can't stay in its current form, I don't think, for too much longer. It's what I forget quoting someone, but it's the irrelevance of education. I think that's what he said, is that education is becoming irrelevant for people when they're so kind of connected and informed outside, that why do you need to learn these things? And often it's the technology that's connecting people socially or giving them sports scores or whatever it is. It's not always information, but it is a real problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. You want to diversify a little bit the format? We can now go to some Crossfire in the panel or Crosswater. You have the choice. You decide your modality.
Actually, I had a question for John. Thank you.
He's all
yeah.
I told you to write for him, actually.
I thoroughly enjoyed your thoughts, but yeah. And it's kind of what picking up on what Emma was saying earlier is I know that you're kind of being deliberately provocative and asking questions like, are we rushing in too quickly? What's wrong with the way we do things and all these things that are wrong? But if you had to stop and think about all the different things all the different ways in which you could be upsetting, the status quo or reinforcing, what's wrong with the system, you may never actually do a project. So at what stage do you go, well, what the hell? Let's just do this thing and see what happens.
It's a direct provocation to a provocation.
I like that question because it takes us forward. I don't think, in a sense, there's any objection, or I'd have any objection or see any flaws with doing a project, with just doing a project, with doing it now, with getting stuck in. What makes me uneasy is what we think we've learnt from it. What we think we might have found a model that we can generalize or abstract or replicate or transfer. I think action, as it were, is good, but much of our reflection is flawed. Is that okay? Did I get off the hook? Did I wriggle out of it?
Well, to put this into context, I want to tell you a real story of General Geisel, who was the president of Brazil in the early 1980s, and was a big crisis in the country. And then he went on live television and said, "Citizens, Brazil is on the edge of an abyss. Let's step forward." So I think that's something what you are saying. Do you want to?
Well, I think I have one reaction to what John was talking about. I think John commented a lot about individual projects and whether they work or not. And when I heard that, I think what I was really struck by was that maybe we should actually think more broadly also, because John also mentioned that, thinking more broadly about ecology. And what I mean by that is that it seemed that a lot of the focus by funders and other actors really is on doing individual projects. But if you really want to make a social change, I think one of the huge barriers is that sometimes individual projects cannot succeed unless you have a broader environment that's actually supportive and has the right conditions in place for these projects to work. And sometimes we are also talking about broader issues like synergies between individual projects. So that's what you call, things like trying to create a kind of a virtuous cycle where different projects actually reinforce one another. So yeah, sometimes we call that a coordination failure, depending on how you want to call it. Yeah, but I think I was really struck by how there's not been enough attention to looking into more systemic conditions and what we can actually do to foster them. So for that part, I don't think I have a good answer, but those are some thoughts.
Carlos Fernandez from the Open University of Catalonia. A few minutes ago I was thinking about the idea of open source and mobile devices, and it came to my mind the idea developed by MIT and Negroponte of one laptop for all. Then I started to think, what about one mobile device for all? Because the idea of Negroponte failed due to different reasons, but arguably one of them was money, no? Principle, we should assume that mobile devices are cheaper than laptops in general. Yes, just a general statement, no? So, in your opinion, what would you think about this idea?
Before moving there, I remind you that everybody already has a mobile device. The latest data is that in a planet of 6.8 billion people, there are subscribers, meaning numbers. Devices, there are many more. 4.9 billion subscribers. So we are very close. If you count the village and you count that there are a few babies who still don't have their personal number, so we are very close to one device for everybody. But you are right in terms of the pain for the use of the device.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. And I was speaking to some folks from Morocco 2 weeks ago. They alerted me to Google in Kenya just launched the Idios phone, which is it's the cheapest Android smartphone for $100, I think it is. So I think that's the bet they're taking. You know, that price will come down, and they're saying, well, why one laptop per child? How about one smartphone per child? It's got great memory. It's got a great camera. You know, it's got a browser, chat, all of that stuff. Obviously, it needs mobile data infrastructure, but that's you can assume that will improve over time. One of the coolest things, it's got each phone can act as a Wi-Fi node. So with one phone, you could set up a network of 4 or 5 places here. So yeah, maybe that's the Google bet.
I worry in the way that you phrase the question that it sounds like a technical fix, or it sounds like a financial fix. You know, that you say, well, not everyone can afford an OLPC, but people can all afford, or most people can afford a mobile phone.
Well, no, not exactly. No, that's not exactly.
Could you please broaden your comment?
No, I think that the project of one laptop for all failed because the price of the laptop in general was very expensive. So the people who had to pay for the project didn't have the money to buy I don't know how many million laptops. I think that with mobile first, second generation mobiles, this problem could be, let's say, I don't know, 50% solved. So this was I didn't want to mean that some people in Africa will be more able to acquire.
But yeah, I suppose what I was reacting to was the perception that we can provide people with a piece of technology, with a piece of computational technology that may be a phone or maybe an OLPC, but essentially it's the same functionality. You know, it does calculations or whatever it does. And actually nothing else has changed. But I think with the mobile phone, everything else has changed. And that's in part why I have a problem with Jill's phrase, technology-enhanced learning, because there isn't any other sort anymore. You know, all learning is enhanced by technology these days because all of society is enhanced by technology these days. There is no version of society that doesn't have, you know, isn't kind of completely permeated by these technologies. And so, you know, and I think that transforms the nature of learning, the nature of education, the nature of knowing, the nature of who we are. And so I don't, you know, what looks like a simple question, is there a kind of substitution we can do between OLPC and phones, is missing the bigger picture, the extent to which our societies are just shot through with technology, and how big a difference that makes. And part of that difference is ownership, agency, control. You know, maybe on the one hand you've got desktop computers which belong to the school, belong to the university, and then at the other end you've got mobile phones which are owned and chosen and valued and express individuality. And I'm not sure where the OLPC is. I mean, they're all green and white, aren't they? Mm-hmm. You know, whereas mobile phones, we all choose our own. We all, you know, customize them. You know, so I think that, you know, to do with identity, you can't just...
No, the question is absolutely bigger. I mean, that there's behind technology, there's ideology, as we said before, and there's a different way of learning. So I absolutely agree. In my case, I didn't want to create such a big question, but obviously there's something else related to identity and related to a lot more elements. No?
To appease John's fears, at least one big sector is still not taken by technology. Most universities continue to teach like in the Middle Age.
just a couple of little observations. Talking about the One Laptop for Child initiative. Quite some years ago, some of us were at a conference, and a senior person from the project was there talking about the product that they were developing. And she talked a great deal about how they were going to improve the battery life, improve the screen readability in the sunshine, etc., etc., etc. And when she asked for questions, I asked what was being done about training for the teachers, and she didn't know how to answer. She was saying, oh no, you just give these things to the children. Children naturally understand technology. They'll be teaching the teachers, which seems extraordinarily strange view. So I think there were many factors to that initiative failing. I think that was one. I think John touched upon something about them all being the same, them being technologies which were designed by kind other people for poor people, perhaps a feeling that, people felt they didn't want to have the thing which was designed for poor people. They wanted to have something more like the things that other people had. I think there's quite a lot of complicated factors involved there, and I think perhaps trying to design a specific cheap mobile for poorer areas could trip over quite a number of those sorts of considerations as well.
Sure. Just a comment. John said society is full of technology these days. Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, said technology is stuff that doesn't work yet. And he said you don't think of a chair as technology, but of course it is. It just works so well. It goes into the background. And so maybe that is how cell phones are going to become.
You probably find that there is technology and the ideology of technology, which is not the same thing. To give you an anecdote, years ago I did research in the Chapare Valley in Cochabamba, near Cochabamba in Bolivia, where the night stuff is being grown. And peasants there have a lot of money, lots. I mean, $20,000 a year is a lot of money at that time, Bolivia, about 20 years ago. And no, 15 years ago. And one of the peasants I was interviewing took me very proudly to his hut, and he showed me an IBM PC. Well, the guy didn't have electricity, okay? I said, and? Well, this is for the education of my children. So it was literally a totem. He was, looked like a computer, but was a totem, he would pray there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add a thing. Well, I am Julián Minguillón from the Open University of Catalonia. I just wanted to add one thing for the One Laptop Per Child project. Of course, it failed because of the price, because of the maintenance, because batteries were failing, the screens were not easy to read. But Jill said what I think is the most probably important issue in that failure is that teachers were not trained, so they were just left with the computers. And not only that there were no contents at all. The computers were empty. So it's like, okay, here you have the technology. It's plastic and some metals inside, and then try to do something. And that was some studies show that were the main reasons for the failure of the project. So replacing the one laptop per child, well, the laptop with a mobile device could reproduce the same scheme. So it's not. I don't think it's a question of the device. I mean, I think it's a question of involving locals in the development of the projects, allowing them to create their own contents, etc. So if we don't take this way, it's going to fail again. Thank you.
Being from what John earlier called the dark side and the... am I too loud? Can you hear me?
No, it's not that. We can hear you. But what about your name?
Lauren Dawes. Yeah, from the dark side, the association that represents the nasty and greedy mobile network operators that charge for their networks and the use of them. And also knowing that these sort of subsidised rates and free airtime deals are really hard to strike, if not impossible, with the operators. Who, and there may be multiple answers for this, but who do we expect is actually going to pay for the services once the funding, the project funding, runs out?
Oh, deafening silence. Sorry, well, I think that is the big problem, and I mean, that's partly why I use the analogy of public toilets. Although, yeah, I find it really. I'm sorry. It depends on the society and it depends on the culture. And as I was saying, I think there are some societies and some cultures where the immediate and automatic answer, the pretty much unthinking answer, would be society picks up the tab at some level, you know, through national government or through local government. And I guess, again, to paraphrase myself, that depends on some kind of argument that mobile learning increases social capital and it makes Great Britain PLC a better trained and more competitive society, or a happier one, or whatever it is that the government's supposed to be organising for us. And you know, if that were true, then it's mainly a problem around actually how do you convince governments, because they've already accepted that's their responsibility. And you know, the answer to then your question then follows on automatically in that particular context, that they then just go through the usual kind of procurement process, you know, for hardware or infrastructure or handsets or whatever it takes, you know, in exactly the same way as they roll out interactive whiteboards. But if we're talking about the developing world in many cases, and if we're talking about those countries where the ideology is not that kind of one, that the government is your nanny, like I say, it's much more problematic, and we get back to the questions about social entrepreneurs or foundations and philanthropies, and that's not a function of kind of GDP per capita, because I guess it's the question that we raised in the US, where the government isn't your nanny, as much as it would be in the Cameroon. Having got that far, I can't get a great deal further, because I don't think anyone else has got a great deal further either in finding that answer. I mean, I guess part of it is finding business models, and maybe they're small and specific, as it were, niche business models that you might find ways of charging for content. You know, market forces might provide an income for particular types of content. They might provide a revenue stream for particular types of interaction or discussion, or they might provide ways of supporting particular kinds of training, I don't know, for nurses, vets, doctors. And so I don't think there's going to be a generic answer or a general answer. And it's just a case of, I guess, attempting to pragmatically move forward into those various niches where there does seem, you know, and hoping that what we end up with is more coverage than gaps. You know, that we can do this and do it equitably. I mean, there's no argument about mobile learning working. It works for rich individuals, rich institutions, and rich countries. The issue is, can we piece together viable ways of working for everyone else?
So thinking about that, sorry, I'm just gonna. Can you hear me? Thinking about that, thinking that a lot of the ministries and governments are very decentralised, is there actually any room for a large-scale sustainable project? Because you were talking about setting up little niche business models in all these different areas, yet we often talk about the struggle of scaling up these projects, but is scale and sustainability actually possible at the end of the day?
I mean, I guess that comes back to the remarks that we were talking about with Steve, that you know, maybe we should just do it. And maybe the notions of scale and sustainability and transferability are just some, you know, fantasy that we feel a kind of moral obligation to address. Yeah. But actually, we're on a hiding to nothing. We'll always lose. And you know, we should just kind of do it here and now. Yeah. And to look for business models that enable a particular set of actors to do it now in a way that just works for here and maybe just works for a bit longer as well. I mean, that's not depressing. I mean, so it's not intended to be depressing. But actually, if you look at the number of failed projects, or unsustained projects, that is depressing.
Thanks.
Lauren, I had 2 points. The one is, I mean, it's a difficult question, but I think two things will happen. The one is, I think that people will pay for content, and if you provide something that is affordable enough and desirable enough and accessible enough, then they'll pay for it. So in other words, if we start charging for our M novels, we would charge 25 cents instead of 90. 90. I'm thinking rands, but let's say $10 for a book, or $8 for an ebook. Charge 25 cents or 1 cent. So make it, go for your Apple, your App Store model, high volume, low margin. The other thing is that telcos are, telcos are like the publishing industry, like these industries that hang on to a model that works even while the world is changing around them. And it's only a matter of time before it changes. So in South Africa, there are 3 major mobile network operators. They complain bitterly that they can't give anything because it's tough out there and it's expensive. But every year they post their annual report, massive profits. Okay, so it's not like they're they're on the edge, but they are still maxing out as much money, squeezing as much money from each person. Whereas if I've got no doubt, if they were to make it, right now it costs 3 rand per minute, whatever it is. If they were to make it 1 cent per minute, they would make the same profits. And that's what happened in the Philippines. They basically made a SMS 1 cent or less. At one stage, SMSs were free. It's the country in the world that sends and receives the most SMSs. Those network operators are still making enough money. So I think that over time they'll realize, okay, so let's subsidize some of this educational content, but there's enough traffic moving up and down that we can still actually get profit from it. Yeah.
Yeah, but just one thing, and I need to be perhaps a little guarded in how I say this, but I think there also might be some consideration of how tax revenues generated by the big networks could be used, and I don't know whether some of the people from the UK in the audience might be aware that there was recently a not very publicised situation in which a large telco was found to have avoided a great deal of UK tax, and we're talking about billions rather than millions. But this was kind of written off by the government, and it kind of raised all sorts of questions. But one of the questions is, how much of that is going on, and could some of that money be diverted into some of the educational things that we're talking about?
Thank you.
I'm going to play a little bit of the devil's advocate, just a little bit. But now talking about business models, I think that we all agree that it was industrialization that brought education for everyone. If we hadn't had the Industrial Revolution, none of us would be here wasting the time in unproductive things. But nevertheless, on the other hand, we still keep on building on projects that circumvent educational institutions and the educational system, and try to go and attack, not support informal education. I say I'm going to play the devil's advocate, so I have an opinion on that, but only part of it. So how is it that we benefited for like 250 years of industrial education that democratized access to knowledge? And now what we are focusing on and concentrating our effort is in circumventing this system instead of enforcing it and fostering it.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting actually, because it brought back some of my reactions when I first heard what John was talking about just now during his talk about schools, and then when we were attacking schools. It's kind of interesting because that was when I was also reminded about Seymour Papers' book in which he pitted schools as instructionism versus constructionism. Yeah, maybe a bit very polarizing. But I think one thing to keep in mind also is that so we do actually have a lot of learning that takes place outside schools, right? So yeah, because I think one of the observations that some commentators are making today is that, well, schools are not that relevant. Well, they're not that effective in teaching some of these real life skills that people need in the real world. But let's keep in mind what schools are actually for, right? So Okay, so if you read some of the education literature, it can be actually pretty depressing because, well, so the stated mission of schools is actually to so-called impart education and blah, blah, blah. But what does that really mean? And we can start unpacking it. And unfortunately, one of those notions of education is really about the fact that schools actually have a very important role to play in society as a kind of a credentialism mechanism. So I think that part is just not going to go away for quite some time. For learning, I think there's still other mechanisms to do that, but you still need that stamp of approval because it is very important to us. But I think what's really worse about schools is that, well, when it really is that stamp of approval. So in this way, this is why some education researchers actually go so far to claim that schools actually could be one of those kinds of mechanisms of exerting social control over the people. Okay, because that's how, you know, schools actually impose a kind of a doctrine on what constitutes highly valued credentials. And a lot of that kind of credentials also depends on behaviors like being able to toe the line, being able to conform to certain rules in society so that you get that credential and blah, blah, blah. So I think that part of it is not going to go away. Yeah, so I think I think we're seeing a very interesting kind of situation now today because even though we're recognizing that traditional schools might be starting to give, and that was what Steve said, it's kind of interesting to also observe that there are schools and experiments today that try to actually understand what is the alternative model to traditional schooling and how is that going to work. So so I read a lot about, you know, people like Katie Salen, for example, who's actually experimenting with innovative school models in New York City, and they're really trying to understand what is it that that schools can learn from video games, right? You know, because you don't have to force a kid to go play a video game, but he does play a video game. He gets hooked on it. You know, he just doesn't go for his meals because he needs to be glued in front of the computer screen until he finishes that. Yeah. So what are some of these kinds of things that schools can really learn from video games? And I think that's actually one of those kinds of direction that we might actually see school, as we call it, changing in substance.
One comment, taking advantage of this silence, I know nothing about M-learning, as I told you, but I know something about educational institutions. So as you know, was a long, long debate throughout history in epistemology about what is science. And now there is consensus. Science is what the scientific community says it's science. Yeah. And the same thing, education. What is education is what the accredited educators say is education. And the rest is your personal business. So the point is, it has nothing to do with children development. It has to do with the stamp. So the point is, for you innovators of all this, you have to lobby the institutional environment of the educational system. Because if they say what you do is playing with children and not education, you're done. So that's my personal advice, that you have to work with the institutions, otherwise you will be working with the children, but the children will be expelled from the school. So yeah.
Kind of touches on that and also harks back a little bit to something that John was saying earlier on about perhaps we're not very good at evaluating mobile learning projects, and something which has kind of come up a lot in our work is that it's very difficult to separate out why something was successful from, was it successful because of the technology, or was it successful just because you were doing something different? And I think that is very important in the context of schools, because in every country, I'm sure, and certainly in the UK, a lot of people go through 16 years of school and leave barely literate and extremely unhappy about themselves and their abilities, which is an appalling waste. And this goes on decade after decade after decade. Our schools go on failing a substantial minority, partly because there's too much of just doing the same thing. So I think there's a very kind of complicated mix here of technology, education, social structure, tradition, etc., etc., etc.
Emma?
Just a little suggestion. I want to specify why we asked Manuel Castells be our moderator, not because he knows lots of facts and knows how to moderate and make jokes, no. Because as far as I read in your website and biography, you had been working a lot exactly at the crossing point between society and technology. And I have read also that you had been working for several years already with the University of Santa Clara, where the business and different kind of entrepreneur people were gathering together, actually talking more or less about these same issues, about attitudes, responsibility, social responsibility of those who know or have better to the rest of the world. Why don't you tell us a little bit what you took out of this collaboration?
That's an ambush. So very quickly, what is interesting is that a number of institutions and universities, actually the network of Jesuit universities in the world, which in the United States is mainly represented in that particular angle by Santa Clara University, built an alliance with the Silicon Valley companies, but not to sell anything, but the companies put the technology, some money, and the personal advice of venture capitalists and technologists to advise specific projects at the request of the people involved in the project. And they actually have created something called the Tech Awards. They give 25 such Tech Awards every year in a ceremony in the San Jose Museum of Technology. And these are small awards, $50,000 for a project that already exists and to go to the next stage. Projects in which doesn't necessarily have to be that technology is involved, but innovation is involved, and the most important thing is that the social entrepreneurship. I mean, it's consensus about what social entrepreneurship is. Social entrepreneurship is not entrepreneurship. It's entrepreneurship to develop activities that ultimately improve society and involve in social change, not simply a profit. And in most cases, there are no profits. So the one thing that I have observed is that more or less what I learned from you, again, in the field that is sincere, I don't know anything. I know about mobile communication. Mireia Fernandez, our devil, knows more than me, but I know something about mobile communication, but I don't know about how mobile communication works in the classroom. But what I have learned from these projects of social entrepreneurship is that the most important thing is the engagement and empowerment of the people in the communities so that they develop a project that serves their communities at the same time they serve themselves. And they constitute, therefore, a reservoir of labor with their families, their friends, their neighbors, and also the benefits, whatever growth comes from there, goes into the local community. And this is not institutionalized. This is not in the school. These are really projects from the bottom up. Just to give one example, in the desert of Mali, a guy started to produce a refrigerated system in the middle of the desert with three big ceramic vases, one smaller than the other, one smaller than the other, and very simple. Water in the layers in between, and then at night the desert it's very cold. The water gets very cold, and the temperature is kept for 24 hours, the hot day, and it's a local refrigerator. So these kind of things is where you can see bottom-up technology, and I think from different perspectives, you are all coming there, either by homegrown technology or from adoption of technology to feed the social needs, and education in this case, in the communities in other case. And I think this is a fundamental principle that we know from the history of technology, that if people appropriate technology to their uses, they develop technology, they adapt technology, and then technology becomes a tool of economic improvement and social change. Swallowing technology doesn't work even for the companies. So if you allow me one small initiative, because we have 15 minutes and we will go to the end of the 15 minutes, I would like to ask our panel, each one of you, please, it's not such a thing as a free lunch, my friend, you should know this. So, to just say a few words in terms of what you are taking away from this seminar. What is the added value for you, or simply you reassess completely everything you know and you discard everything you didn't know, or what is the added value? Which is the social change in yourselves from this seminar? And then if someone is furiously against any statement, you will have about 1 minute and 30 seconds to react to that. So could you start?
Okay, so I think one of the things that John's talk just now reminded me about, and I think this is probably one of the key points just to take away from here, because we seem to be really talking about who's actually going to be involved in the provision of some of these essential services like education, and it seems that we are really talking about this huge dichotomy between market failures on one end and government failures on the other end. Okay, but I think what's most important to take away from this dichotomy is, well, I think there's a more transcendental issue about accountability actually, and where is that going to come from? And we are talking about accountability not only in terms of people in power or people who have been entrusted resources, but how about our own accountability to other people in our communities to actually get such important social needs and services actually delivered.
Goodness, right, in 1 minute. Okay,
no, I didn't say 1 minute.
Oh, sorry, okay.
All in all, we have now 12 minutes and 30 seconds.
Well, having been involved in development work for about the last 5 or 7 or 8 years, I think the more I know, the less I understand. And this 2 days has contributed to that process. I now know more, and I now understand less. And I think that's a very good thing, because I've been really fired up by hearing about the projects and about the specifics and about real people. And I've continued to become cautious about what we can learn from that. And yeah, the need to be, and actually just the opportunity to engage with people, just because it helps to deconstruct my understanding.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Yes, what would take away? I've really appreciated being able to get together with a lot of people from lots of different parts of the world doing rather different things, and with a kind of a different focus on mobile learning, because I think it's quite easy when you're at home and in your own office talking to your own colleagues, you get quite lazy because you're familiar with your own projects. You've got a kind of consensus view of what you think is the way things are going, and it's very easy to just not question that and to just keep on. Oh yes, we know exactly what we're doing and where we're going and all those sorts of things. So I think it's quite interesting to come along and mix with a very diverse group of people and talk about all sorts, and also to start questioning some of the broader issues. Very much appreciate John raising some of the kind of broader ethical issues, and kind of prompting us to take a second look. And we tend to hear and pass on good news stories, and you find yourself hearing about the guy in Africa whose cow was sick and he was able to get help and sort it out because he had a mobile phone, and you find yourself repeating these things without really stopping to ask too many questions. So yeah, I think an encouragement to continue to think broadly and to learn from others is a very valuable opportunity.
Thank you. I've taken 2 things away. The first is that Barcelona is the best place in the world to have a conference. And it's certainly where I'm going to hold any workshops from now on. And no, I'd like to echo that, actually. Just I'm very inspired, actually, by the great projects that we've heard about. And it's very clear that these are all little pieces of a puzzle, and we kind of we're on board this plane. It's flying. We don't really know where it's going, but we're in the air.
Very good metaphor.
Okay. And we're kind of fixing the engine while leaning out the window, just keep it in the air, but we don't really know. And so for example, the Clicker SRS project today, their whole kind of value add was this supports the existing education practice. Yesterday we heard lots of projects saying the problem is technology supports the existing practice. So, two completely opposite ends, both kind of doing their thing in the world, both interesting projects. In the same way, we've all taken quite different approaches, but we're all part of something that is very exciting. I'm still kind of extremely excited about mobile, and the potential is a word we hear a lot, but it really is different. It's already in the hands of people. It's a much greater issue of not so much access and giving people a laptop, but it's about effective use. And it's about observing, and it's about leveraging, and it's about trying to make sense of it. So the last 2 days have been good in kind of reigniting that flame and saying, well, we should just carry on doing our thing and going for it.
Thank you. Barcelona definitely has mellowed all of you because you have had such a civilized debate. Now, having learned the technique of the ambush, I would like to ask Emma Kiselyova, what has been her takeaway from the seminar? What have you learned from this seminar? What has been important?
I keep thinking that technology is a very unreliable thing. I still have enough kind of caution and prudence of adopting new ways, like many of them, like, for example, social networks or two social ways of learning, where I'm afraid from different speakers we actually have heard so that the main thing that we engage, it's kind of seduce, that we kind of win them, students who are reluctant. And today there was a lot of talk about motivation, what to do with them and how to motivate them. And I was suddenly thinking about, what about Sugata Mitra? You remember who actually his methodology was very simple. Leave it unattended. Let them look at this, play with this, and curiosity is a very good methodology by itself. So what is happening? Are we talking about different students who are not curious, not the same kind of the students, or what? But basically also another piece of my, let's say, what I have taken out of our conversations from the 2 days, I still will opt for myself for a technology which does not fail. And I am asking myself what it is. Well, look, Skype, I always thought that Skype is the most reliable thing, and yesterday we were not able to complete the talk of my Miguel Nussbaum. It fell in the middle. So this Norway group, I said, are you sure you will be able? And if it fails again, they say, we don't need your reds, your connections. We brought with us our simple and powerful router, and we can go independently. And it's, they say, so simple that it cannot fail. And that's why I think that Clicker and this student response system should be studied very much and used very much.
Thank you very much. So on this note of hope, I want to thank you, the panelists, and keep enjoying Barcelona.
Thank you, Manuel, for your time and your engagement with us.